This is the ad hoc committee in regard to the Grand Traverse County Jail. I'm Commissioner Sonny Wheelock. I'm the chairman of this committee. We have other people participating in the committee. We have Captain Todd Ritter, the jail administrator, Commissioner Tom Mayer, Defense Attorney Matt Connolly, retired Judge Phil Rogers, and we have also invited Judge Thomas Power, Circuit Court Judge, Chief Circuit Court Judge, and Commissioner Mike Stepka, Chief District Court Judge. And we've also invited Prosecuting Attorney Bob Cooney to participate. We're trying to get as much information as we can. This committee has basically two functions. One is to address the short-term needs for mental health issues in the jail. We have, what we believe to be a significant shortfall in mental health care being provided in the jail, trying to figure out how to deal with that better. And then our long-range goal is to identify hopefully anyway, the construction of a new Grand Traverse County Jail. As many of you know, our current jail is overcrowded on a regular basis. We're boarding out prisoners in Leelanau County or other counties on a pretty much daily basis, I believe. Judge Rogers will tell you that it's still cheaper to board them out than it is to build a jail. We've had that discussion many times. But boarding out prisoners is not the ideal way to handle our jail population either. So we're going to move on for that. Tonight, first thing we have to do is everyone, I believe, was sent a copy of the minutes of the April 17th meeting. Was there any questions or comments on those? I'll take a motion to accept the minutes as provided.
Make the motion.
Okay.
I'll second.
Motion by Ritter, supported by Mayer. Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. The next thing is this is the first opportunity for public comment. We're going to hear presentations tonight. In an ideal world, we would have heard a presentation from Great Lakes Community Mental Health, and one from CCS, our healthcare provider that's under contract in the jail, and one from Dr. Connolly, who is the psychiatrist that is contracted to work in the jail. I know that the CCS representative, while en route up here, received notice of a family emergency, had to turn around and go back downstate, so he will not be here tonight. I believe Captain Ritter has some information anyway in regard to that presentation. We also have a written proposal from Dr. Conlon, and so we do have Chris is scrambling trying to get us all fixed up here because we have a conflict. We have 3 other meetings going on at the same time, and Chris is trying to facilitate all 3 of us. So, but Community Mental Health has a PowerPoint presentation to talk about, and we're going to see that in just a moment. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment? Okay, if we can give Chris just a second, she'll be out of our way, and then we'll take public comment at the podium. That way the videotape. This meeting is being videotaped. It is not being transmitted live, but it is being videotaped so as that we will have it for records, or if anyone questions, what we did, what we discussed, they'll have the opportunity to see that via the county's website. Okay. If you could identify yourself and public comment.
Thank you. Tom Busamara. I'm chair of the Before, During, and After Incarceration, which is dedicated to promote alternatives to incarceration, including restorative justice programming and support for those incarcerated and their families. And I really want to talk to you about programming. And I have, with some information from an attorney friend of mine, information about, I think the MCL, is that Michigan Common Law or Michigan Criminal Law? Compiled law, thank you. 801.257, I'll just read part of it. Prisoner may receive, if approved by the court, a reduction of 1/4 of his or her term and if his or her contact, diligence, and general attitude merit such reduction. And I want to say that that would be an intense taxpayer saving if we could reduce the time of incarcerated. How would we know that someone was diligent and had a general attitude of positivity or good contact. I think one of the ways this would be measured is by participation in programming. Most of, or half of our board of directors of BDAI are here tonight. I'd like them to stand up right now, if you would, please. These are all professionals, licensed therapists, certified teachers, conflict resolution folks, which make up the bulk of our group. And we want to just stand and let you know that we're here, thank you, to continue this partnership we have in order to accomplish our goals. So there are 12 possible topics that we've identified, and we have met with Captain Ritter, did some preliminary discussion about this kind of programming we could do, volunteer basis, that would improve the mental health of our incarcerated just simply by giving them a positive thing to do instead of just sitting in jail. And some of the topics, these are not faith-based or religious, they're humanistic-based kinds of value programming. How to deal with life losses, relationship transforming or deforming, effective co-parenting communication, addiction, what we know, depression, grief and trauma, healthy boundaries for healthy relationships, job versus vocation, what are your gifts, self-evaluation, what I need, the list goes on. We would, of course, meet with staff, administration, and figure out what their goals and priorities would be in order to implement these. What we basically need then is just a time slot, like one evening where the provider could be brought in, and inmates who are pre-screened and want to complete these kinds of coursework could be brought down. And I know that's labor intensive. Anytime anyone comes into the jail, as I've been doing for a number of years, have to be wanded down and brought through, and then people you're serving have to be brought in.
You can kind of wrap it up a little bit.
Okay, I will. I'm just saying we're here to partner with you, and we are pleased that you're talking about a full-time mental health professional, a psychiatric nurse practitioner or something equivalent that could screen people coming in, that could provide support in crisis ongoing. And so we just hope that conversation continues among you. So I just thank you for your time. And I want one last thing is we will have to meet or leave en masse here in a minute to go to our meeting, which is regularly scheduled at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to make public comment at this point? Okay.
Cindy Kinlan, I'm here as a citizen, and I really hadn't expected to speak, but and you might have discussed this at length before, but I'm just wondering if anybody's ever considered a mental health court. I know that I had a really extremely great demonstration from NAMI at their conference this last week, and in Lansing and in other areas in Michigan, and they did an aggregate report in 2012 really showing the success of having mental health courts. And obviously what they do, it's all about treatment. So the judge makes, if they decide who's appropriate, the judge makes a decision, a finding, and if the gentleman or lady decide to agree to it, they go through actually a treatment phase where they have to come back to court, say, every week, and then they have to go to counseling, take medications or whatever. And out of their report, out of 678 that finished, that actually went through the program, 450 actually successfully completed it, and 43% actually followed everything to the line, which I think is huge. And there's also, they had seen that there was a $15,000 savings on every individual that actually completed the program over a period of the year. So just informational. Thank you.
Anyone else at this point?
Eric Van Duzen, regarding Correct Care Solutions and Northern Lakes Community Mental Health, current contract with Grand Traverse County for services in the jail. Has anyone considered conducting a performance audit to determine whether they're in compliance, first of all, with their contract terms, which mandate that they coordinate their services, which seems to not be occurring, and second of all, whether or not they are meeting the national standards for health services in jails. I've read this book front to back. And it's very clear that the policies and practices that are being followed in the Grand Traverse County Jail are deficient from the correction standpoint, from the community health, mental health individuals, providing emergent care and no follow-up care pretty much to anyone unless they're a current client, and Correct Care Solutions requirement to coordinate with community mental health when someone is taken off suicide watch, for instance, which there's basically no follow-up care from my observations. Back on June 12th of 2014, the Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners were presented at a special informational session, a PowerPoint presentation from two experts from the National Institute of Corrections. And one of those experts indicated that, in his opinion, the jail was over-reliant on cameras. These are quotes from the PowerPoint presentation that he gave in this room in 2014. You're over-reliant on cameras. It's just unfortunate that you need so many when direct observation by staff works better than cameras. He also indicated a lot of your cells are not appropriate for especially special populations like the mentally ill. And he goes on, quote, another major concern is that all of the cells that have elements that are the opposite of suicide resistant. It's good that you have all the cameras and that you've had relatively few suicides, but there's many opportunities in virtually all parts, all of the housing units for inmates if they want to hang themselves to do that. That's kind of broken up because that's a direct quote from what he told you in 2014. And that was prior to the most recent two suicides. So my question for Community Mental Health, Correct Care Solution, Dr. Conlon, or anyone else that's putting forth a proposal for you to spend additional funds on them to provide 24-hour service or more service or 40 hours a week, whatever you determine is going to occur, ask them how not only are they going to provide those additional services, but how are they going to mitigate those structural deficiencies that exist in your jail that I just noted that these experts warned you about in 2014. How are they going to mitigate those? And how are they going to mitigate the deficiencies in the policies and practices of the Grand Traverse County Jail corrections officers and command staff that permit corrections officers to write on their action reports and activity logs that they actually performed cell checks and lied on those activity reports consistently and maybe systemically. You know, Mr. Halloway, for instance, hung in this jail cell for 3 hours while an officer that is still employed by this agency lied on his activity report and indicated in 3 separate instances that he had performed the cell checks and all was okay. Well, guess what? All was not okay in those 3 hours while he was hanging from the cell.
Okay, we're not going to get into specific cases, so if you could wrap up the public comment, please.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we will move forward with the presentations in response to the request for recommendations and of alternatives for additional mental health services. Carl, as long as you're here first, we'll let you go first.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris,
So, don't think. Perfect, thanks, one.
While we're getting the technical setup, let me just say thank you for having us back. We have a presentation and a proposal for this ad hoc committee. And I'm Carl Kovacs. I'm the CEO of Northern Lakes Community Mental Health Authority. And I am going to turn over the presentation to 2 of our staff, Joni Blamer, who is the Chief Population Officer for Adults with Mental Illness at Northern Lakes, and Lori Fisher, who is our Director of Finance for Northern Lakes. And I believe Lori's going to go first, and they're going to tag team the presentation, and I hope that it's informative and helps you with your decision making. Thank you.
One of the questions the Northern Lakes Community Mental Health was...
You'll probably have to pull the microphone over by you a little bit more, otherwise I'll pick it up.
One of the questions that Northern Lakes Community Mental Health was asked is what has changed over the years? In the last 5 years, Northern Lakes has had a reduction in general funds, which are the funds that are available to us to provide services to individuals without Medicaid or Health in Michigan plan in locations that are not covered by Medicaid, including the jail services. $5.7 million was received in 2013. In 2014, the government expanded Medicaid to include the population of individuals who had not previously qualified for Medicaid. The theory was that general funds would be needed a lot less because more folks would qualify for Medicaid, which reduced our general funds by over $2 million. Then again in 2016, the state of Michigan changed how the hospitalizations, the state-funded hospitals were funded, no longer running the revenues and expenses through community mental health. What that did was, in the situation of reducing inpatient stays, that general fund dollars were no longer available to us. We're now currently at $2 million in general funds, which is way less than half of what we were at. The state-funded hospitalizations are still requiring a 10% local match from the CMHs for usage of those hospitals.
I think where you wanted to ask it, if there are any questions, we can just hold them to the next so we can cover all.
Yes, thank you. So as you all are probably aware, all the counties that we serve, all 6 are giving Northern Lakes Community Mental Health county appropriations to the tune of $1 million by each of the counties combined. In fiscal year 2017, we provided almost $50 million worth of Medicaid services to the 6 counties. Almost $23 million of those were provided to Grand Traverse County citizens, which is 46% of all the services that we provide. In 2004, the state of Michigan required that we use local money to match Medicaid in order to sustain Medicaid services at a more global level. So every year, we are required to pay $574,000 of those local funds to the state of Michigan for the purpose of Medicaid sustaining. The general funds that we provide also require a 10% local match. So every general fund service, that $2 million, 90% of it is covered by general funds, but 10% has to be covered by local funds. The average is about $211,000 over the last 3 years that them appropriations are used for. Because the 10% requirement on state hospitalization is still intact, $144,000 on average is paid to the state of Michigan for the 10% share. This includes the forensic center. The forensic center is the center that folks who are found not guilty by reason of insanity go to. CMH has no authority over admissions or discharges, and that runs about half of that $144,000. Community Mental Health also provides services in excess of the general funds that are allotted to us. When that occurs, we need to use the local appropriations or fund balance to pay for that difference. Over the last 3 years, the average has been in excess of $250,000. So as you can see, the $574,000, the $211,000, the $144,000, the $278,000 are in excess of the local appropriations that we receive from the counties. In the last 18 months, we have provided 2,875 contacts in the 6 county jails to 1,032 inmates. Within Grand Traverse County itself, 1,704 contacts have been made to 573 individuals individuals for an average of about 3 contacts per person. Within Grand Traverse County itself, of them 1,704 contacts in the last 18 months, almost 1,500 of them have been for crisis or crisis interventions. Additional assertive community treatment services have been provided by staff, as well as some case management and coordination. Based on the cost of the services provided in the jail, that's $146,000. I'm going to turn it over to Jody.
At this point, we have a couple of hard copies of the presentation, but I know it might be difficult to see.
I can't see.
Old retired people can't read that.
Yeah, well,
Just-
I'm one of them. I'm not retired, but I can.
If we can back up I have just a little question. I received some information from the State Finance Office that shows that community mental health funding as a whole in 2008 in the state of Michigan was $554.5 million. The budget for the state of Michigan for community mental health, according to this document, shows that the 2018 overall budget for community mental health is $2.9 billion. So I'm trying to figure out, all I hear from local is how their money's being cut, but yet according to this document coming from the State Budget and Finance Office, in the last 10 years, the overall commitment of funds by the state of Michigan for mental health services has went from $554.5 million to $2.9 billion. That's a pretty significant increase, about 400% by my math. And I'm trying to figure out how, if the state's given 400% more money than they were 10 years ago, why am I continuously hearing how we're getting so much less?
That is a whole other conversation, Mr. Chair, and I guess what I would like to do is, you asked us to do a presentation in our proposal.
Absolutely.
We'd be happy to have that conversation in depth.
Absolutely. I just when we talk about money, numbers, then the numbers don't match the other documents that I have. So, I really want to hear your presentation about what we're going to do and what we're going to fix. We're going to get into a long discussion somewhere along the way about how we're going to pay for it, but the first thing we need to identify is what we need to do.
So that was our understanding, is that we would answer the question that was asked last time about what changed in our funding, because that's all that Lori and I can speak to, is what Northern Lakes receives. And then also, what are some recommendations for what we can do? Because we all share the concern of services that are occurring or need to occur, or we would like to see occur in the jail. So we looked at a full array, and the first thing that we looked at was training. So there's a couple of trainings that we can consider here. We have mental health first aid training. Northern Lakes has been offering that. We've offered it free of charge to law enforcement. Many of the law enforcement in our area have attended and taken us up on that. Actually, the Michigan Association Sheriff's Department invited us to do a full training last October at Camp Grayling, and we took full advantage of that, and we had law enforcement officers, jail staff, correction staff from all of our counties, and all of the counties in the northern, lower Michigan, as well as the UP, attend that training. There's also a training that's sponsored by MCOLS. It's called Mental Health Crisis, Managing a Mental Health Crisis, and that is specifically focused on the jail. So we have a Wexford County deputy. So Wexford County reached out to us and said, we want this training, will you partner with us? We said absolutely. So we have a staff that joined them. So Deputy Doyle and Stacy Kaminsky went to that training. They received certification. They offered a training in Northern Michigan in January of this last year. My understanding is that they will offer another one in the fall, and that's open and my understanding, advertised to Northern Michigan law enforcement as well as corrections staff in the jails. So we would definitely recommend that all corrections officers take one of those trainings. We would also provide specific trainings on disorders like mood disorders, schizophrenia, personality disorders, substance use disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, autism, as well as intellectual developmental disabilities. So those could be smaller, focused trainings. The others are larger. The mental health first aid is a day, and the managing mental health crisis from MCOLS is a 2-day training. We believe that we should do some training on the Michigan Mental Health Code requirements. so that we all have a good understanding of what governs us, the mental health care in Michigan. Also, we were in a unique position through some grant funding to have a trip to Houston to look at some law enforcement and jail correction services in Houston, Texas. And we did bring some things that we'll pass out later for the ad hoc committee to look at, keep, peruse, see what they're doing, see if you want to do any of that. But they offer a train the trainer for mental health. It's a 40-hour training, and they have all of their staff go through that. And the information that we brought back for you has some data in it that you can see that they've shown reduced recidivism for people returning to the jail, reduced recidivism in more intensive inpatient care, and increased interaction with jail personnel as well as the inmates. And they also noted they had decreased anger outbursts and decreased violent interactions between inmates and corrections officers as a result of this training. We specifically believe that that training should include executive level staff from the Sheriff's Department as well as community mental health, and then also frontline staff that oversee the frontline staff. So we thought that Nate Alger would be a possible good option, as well as myself, Joni Blamer, as the executive team level to help ensure, if we were to go down that path, that this training was learned and promoted in a way that would benefit the correction staff and inmates. Also, Todd Ritter and Stacy Kaminsky, who both are responsible for direct operations for each of our areas respectively. We believe that pre and post jail diversion is critical, and we need to do training on that, and we need to find a way to do that better collaboratively together. Because ideally, the best option is people are not getting to your jail at all. So if we can intervene in a pre-jail booking, that's the best. If we can intervene at a post-jail booking and significantly reduce the amount of jail time, then that would be our second option. So we believe that we can do better in that and should do better in that, collaboratively working together regardless of what the outcome of your committee is. I would like to see our collaboration in that. So then we talk about assessment and treatment. So there is a brief jail mental health screen that people can use, the officers can use to aid in the early identification of mental illness and also acute psychiatric problems. This can be conducted during the booking process. It takes 3 minutes to complete. This assessment has been vetted by the SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Association. They looked at this and they use it, and they say that they found good data to support it. I brought a copy of that as well that I'll pass out so you can take a look at it to see how easy it actually is to administer. And we believe that if we use that tool well, it could guide further treatment within the jail setting. So we were asked about a licensed mental health professional. We believe that if you wanted a licensed mental health professional in the jail, they could evaluate all inmates who answered yes, according to that jail screening we just spoke about. If they answer yes to questions 7 or 8, they automatically get a referral. If they answer yes to any 2 questions, 1 through 6, they would get a referral. We believe that the licensed mental health professionals should see all of those individuals that fall into those categories. We believe that the mental health professional can then use that assessment as well as their face-to-face contact and more in-depth assessment to develop a jail mental health treatment plan that could include any of the following. Could include group counseling, could include an assessment for emergent risk of harm to self or others, as well as a referral to community integration services. We believe that that person could respond to mental health crises within the jail setting while they were on duty, and when they were off duty and not performing services in the jail, we could defer to our crisis hour, after-hours service that we have available. This individual could monitor the mental health status of inmates housed in observation cells, including a full risk assessment every 24 hours. That's what we believe is the best standard of care if somebody's on suicide watch. So community reintegration services, we touched on this last time and talked about it a little bit. This would be your discharge planning. We believe that a certified peer support specialist could do this work. We believe that any inmate incarcerated for 30 days or more may voluntarily work with this peer support specialist to secure any of the following. We believe that they could help them with setting up medical care, including medication management upon discharge, setting up primary care services, helping them find a doctor if they don't have one, medication assistance programs, we could link them to that. We could also link and coordinate their behavioral health care appointments, whether that be with community mental health or a private provider, should they have a private provider in the community. We can connect them with the Northern Michigan Regional Entity for substance abuse treatments and appointments, if that was requested. We would work with Veteran Affairs and make sure that the veterans are linked to the services that they have available in Grand Traverse County and in Northern Michigan. We can help individuals in obtaining legal services if they want. We can refer them to the free legal aid programs. We could work with them if they have behavioral health specialists or other specialists working with them to make referrals to the Homeless Prevention Court in the event that the person is homeless and working on their recovery. And honestly would be appropriate for that because they don't see everyone, but somebody has to be working on their recovery. We could assist with natural contacts, having them rebuild their bridges with their family members or possibly even faith-based. And those are key. The natural supports and faith-based, they're key for people to having transportation to the appointments that we set up and having those supports outside the jail. So when we looked at the cost of the services, Northern Lakes has 2 staff trained for the mental health first aid, and we provide the supplies for that. It's an 8-hour training. It would cost Northern Lakes about $1,000 for each 8-hour training. Again, we've offered that at free of charge. We're willing to do that. For Grand Traverse County, we believe that that would cost staff time. We don't know what that is. You'd have to put that number in there. Managing a mental health crisis, which again is the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards training. Northern Lakes has $1,000 for 2-day training. So we have one person, I told you, Stacy Kaminski does that. Wexford County has offered Officer Doyle's time for training in Northern Michigan twice a year, so we'll January and then again in the fall. They've agreed to do that. And then for Grand Traverse County, it would be the staff time. Training the trainer for the mental health training. So Northern Lakes was in a position that we were able to write and secure a grant to work with law enforcement. And we recently visited Houston to see what they had available through this grant. We believe that what we saw there would greatly benefit Grand Traverse County. We had Traverse City Police attend with us, who had good things to say about the law enforcement services as well as the jail services they had. We had Wexford County Sheriff's Department and Wexford City Police attend with us at this training. The individuals that I mentioned earlier, Todd, Stacy, Nate, and myself, if we were to agree to that, it would cost, we would be willing to pay out of those grant funds $5,000 of their salary, $5,187 of their salary for them to go because we believe it will make a difference in your jail. We would pay for our salaries to go out of that grant. We would pay for the travel and the lodging and the meals. That would be a total of $16,259. Again, those are grant dollars made available to us for the collaboration of law enforcement and community mental health. Those grant dollars are available to us through Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. A seasoned licensed mental health professional, similar to the person Todd spoke about last month, Joe, is $98,000 with salary and benefits, and a certified peer support specialist is $65,500 in benefits with salary and benefits. So that's our presentation.
Any comments?
Yeah, so I have a couple questions. With this, so we've kind of broken this down into there's 3 segments of the population with some type of mental health need. The urgent and emergent, which you guys are seeing now, regardless if they're consumer or not. Those that are maybe borderline, that are consumers, that you guys are continuing to see through case management. So those that are not registered consumers that are borderline that may come in that start to deteriorate is what we're looking at this for. So with that, if we have a licensed mental health professional through you, they determine there's a need for psychotropic medications. What is your plan for that at that point? Would that be a referral through community mental health or a referral through Correct Care Solutions.
So I would ask you a question back. Who's determining psychotropic medications as appropriate?
I'm saying if the mental health professional does.
The mental health professional, someone of my caliber with a master's licensed social worker, would not make that determination. It's outside the scope of my practice. My license does not allow me to speak to what medications are needed for someone. If I suspect that someone, or Joe, for example, suspects that someone would benefit from medications, they would refer to your medical provider.
Okay. So if it gets referred to CCS, and we use the psychiatric contract that's in place now for that medication, for aftercare and follow-up for mental health, what would the plan be? Would this person see that, continue to see that person for follow-through? Because now it's gone to CCS, and CCS is now prescribed a medication? Or is that care going to get shifted to CCS?
Are you talking about the group services that we referred to?
Well,
or-
this licensed mental health professional we're looking at that as that shortstop for that population that are not consumers. So if it's a non-consumer that has started to deteriorate, and you say, this licensed mental health professional says this person needs more care than I can give. Maybe that's medication intervention, something more. They refer that to CCS. CCS, the psychiatrist says, yes, this person needs psychotropic medications. They put them on psychotropic medications. What is the level of care that can be expected from the mental health professional through CMH if they're a non-consumer once they start those psychotropic medications? Will they still continue to see that person and work with coping skills and other mechanisms? Or are they now going to say, now you're a CCS client because you've been prescribed meds and you're not a CMH consumer?
I would defer to you on that, but I'll answer that more specifically. So I would defer to you, Todd, as the jail administrator in the sheriff's department to say what your contracts allow or don't allow. If you wished that community mental health worker to remain involved in that care, I would expect that that's what we would do. Because again, once they do that mental health screening for inmates, we're looking at that to further guide our treatment. So we wouldn't be able to prescribe meds. We would expect that your provider would do that. But if they sent that person back to us and they were on meds and they still needed the group services and the ongoing coordination and care, and they're referred to the community reintegration services, we would provide those services according to the contract that we would develop with you.
Okay. Is your limitation on providing services one that people don't have Medicaid, or that Medicaid won't pay for services when they're in the jail?
When an individual is housed in the jail, they're arrested, they become the property of the jail, we cannot use our Medicaid dollars to provide that service in the jail. Their Medicaid is actually suspended. So it's not even whether we can or we can't. They do not have Medicaid available to them at that time. If you were to send through a claim, it's suspended. It would be rejected.
Then why do you service people with whom you have a prior client relationship? Presumably they have Medicaid, they have a prior relationship with you, but you'll serve them in the jail.
Yes.
Why?
Because
What's the difference?
Well, the difference is that an individual is open to us for ongoing services because they met the criteria for the seriously mentally ill according to the definition of the mental health code. So we provide those services, and we believe that when someone goes into the jail and they're in our services, that is not the time to abandon their care. That is the time to engage them in the jail so that we can help them when they go get out of jail to hopefully not return to jail. It's that we're there to continue the services that we have set up with them, the agreement that we have. But we have to use the local funds that Lori spoke about earlier. The general funds and the local funds are the funds that we use to provide those services because we cannot bill Medicaid.
I always get hung up on that point right there because we get into the discussion about, well, they're clients so we can serve them, but they're non-clients so we can't. You know, every client that you have when you saw them the first time was not a client. So, you know, I get, in my mind, when an assessment is done and the person is in need of mental health issues, the fact that they were not previously a client, I have a real tough time with the idea, well, then we can't serve them because they're not previously a client. Because I firmly believe that, you know, every one of those clients that you have came to you initially as a non-client and you took them on to provide services for them. And these people that you are assessing in our jail that need mental health services that may not have previously been a client, they are still in need of your service.
Yeah, so let me see if I can make that a little clearer. So if someone who comes to us for the first time and they're an individual, there's going to be two outcomes to that. They're either going to be accepted according to the definition of being seriously, persistently mentally ill, and we will open them for services, or we're going to deny them for services because they do not meet that criteria, and we're going to make referrals to the community. The same thing is true for the jail. So when Joe is in the jail, if Joe believes that somebody meets the criteria for our services, he refers them for an initial assessment. And that initial assessment is completed by our access department, and the access will then make the determination of whether they meet that criteria of seriously, persistently mentally ill. If they do, we open them for services while they're in the jail, and then we will provide those services.
And I think where some of it gets lost in what we're discussing is, we're discussing the borderline population that come in and start to deteriorate. And those are the ones we're trying to focus on right now.
Yep. So this is what I would say to that. That's absolutely accurate, because somebody who's functioning very well in the world outside of jail, obviously being in jail in and of itself is anxiety provoking, right? And what if you were on medications and now you don't have medication, or you had a certain medication that was working for you but it's not on the formulary, so you had to change it? All of those things are going to change somebody's ability to function. So it is not a surprise to me that someone who's in jail might not function as well as they would outside of jail. That's where we do provide those crisis services. So when you saw the numbers that Lori put on, the vast majority of those we can code as crisis services regardless of your level of functioning, regardless of your insurance. Crisis services mandated for us. And that's why the vast majority of those fall into that category. And that's where we're hoping to identify them. And I think having a screening tool that I shared, and I'll give that to you, that screening tool will help greatly for all people, for us to work collaboratively, so the corrections officer can say, hey, this is the screening and these are the answers, and I need you to provide some guidance before they slip down to the bottom.
I'll admit being confused. Your clarity has confused me. I thought you said that if there's a pre-existing relationship, someone has been previously diagnosed as seriously mentally ill or pervasively mentally ill or chronically mentally ill, and they go into the jail, you'll provide the services. They'll be paid for out of local funds, but you will provide the services. And then I thought you said, well, we do come into the jail, and if we make that assessment in the jail, we provide the services. It's my understanding that was the whole problem. People were being diagnosed, and they weren't getting services in the jail.
Well, there's a difference between being diagnosed and meeting the persistently mentally ill criteria that governs us. So the persistently mentally ill criteria gets at the functioning level. That's what we have to look at in order for someone to be eligible for services. A diagnosis alone will not do that. Someone who has an adjustment disorder because they're in the jail is not going to meet the criteria for Northern Lakes Community Mental Health ongoing services. Someone who has schizophrenia that we've laid eyes on for the first time in the jail, we're going to do an assessment, and we're going to open them for services if they're functioning.
What about suicide ideation? First time suicide ideation.
That would not necessarily, we would not bring in someone for an assessment of ongoing services at that point in time. We would first do an assessment of immediate risk and make a referral to the hospital. If someone had that kind of ongoing ideation that it was an imminent risk, we would either say to the jail correction staff, we believe that they need to be hospitalized, we need to make that happen, or we would say to Captain Ritter, what do you want to do? We believe that he's a danger to himself, and a lot of times those go into suicide watch. And we follow up with them when we know of it every 24 hours with a full risk assessment until the concern has subsided.
In the jail?
In the jail. Or they would go to inpatient care, one or the other. We do send people to inpatient care from the jail when it's needed, when we know of it and it's needed.
Questions?
So, Joni, in this, with the licensed mental health professional, do you see that position as effectively a case manager?
I see it equivalent to Joe.
Okay.
And how we utilize that time. Joe is fully capable of doing group therapy. Joe is fully capable of making the referrals and doing skill development and the assessments.
Okay.
As we've talked about in the past, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had 80 hours a week of Great Lakes Community Mental Health staff in our jail. Now we're in the 8 to 10 hour range, so this proposal to add someone in 40 hours a week, I'm sure that's absolutely a step in the right direction. I'm just not quite sure how we went from 80 hours a week to 8 hours a week, so we'll get to that. When I scribble notes in my corners of my pages, which I do a lot, one of the things that I had foreseen that we needed a mental health assessment of every person that's booked into the jail. Some of them are going to be a 5-minute, 3-minute thing like this checklist that you got, yeah, they're fine, and then some are going to take more. Whether a social worker is the right term or whether this licensed mental health professional is the right term, someone to interact with these people. Many of these folks just simply need someone to talk to and communicate with. They struggle with some of that. Obviously there are going to be those patients that need the psychotropic medications. Anytime we have medications, we need to make sure that there have to be follow-ups. And I think the one piece that we're probably losing along the way is for all of our people, whether they're in the jail and whether they're receiving any mental health services, is to make sure that there's some sort of follow-up care for them. And I think that's probably one of the biggest deficiencies we have, is that when people are released from jail or whatever, we don't have any way to track them or to follow them up. Some of that is intentional because they don't want to know they don't want us to know where they went. So many of these people, it's part of the discussion comes down to you talk about the people that were functioning just fine in society. Many of these people are on the edge of functioning in society. They're not functioning just fine, and once they make the move into the jail, now they're not functioning at all. So it's not the person that's functioning just fine in society. It's those people that are functioning on the edge of society that once they go to the jail, they're not able to function. And that, those are the people that we're trying to make sure don't fall through the holes. And I think we all can acknowledge that we have deficiencies in that services. So trying to figure out how do we do that better. And, we all know it's going to come with a price tag, but that's what we have to figure out. Tom?
Mr. Chairman, looking at your proposal, you've got a licensed mental health professional, and I would assume that could be a social worker or someone who's got appropriate licensing and also experience, and a certified peer support specialist. It sounds kind of like a case manager who's going to help them organize what services they need, including exit into the community with services that they'll help organize to support the person's continued success, hopefully. Is that right?
Yes, and with a clarification. So, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I made myself 2 notes to respond to you, Mr. Chair. The first is, I'll respond to your question about
Okay,
the
sure, take your
certified
time.
peer
I'm not in a
support.
hurry, that's fine.
No, I'm gonna do that now, because I had both of these, and I think I can do
Okay.
both. So the first certified peer support specialist is someone who has lived experience. They've been in this position, and they've overcome. And they can relate to people in ways that we can't as professionals, or in ways that the corrections staff can't. And we have engaged in a peer support program for 10 years at Community Mental Health. And every single year that we've tracked their pre and post data for hospitalization, inpatient, and more intensive services, every year that number gets less and less in terms of the recidivism of going into the hospital. So it's something for us to pay attention to. And part of that is those individuals with that lived experience, they can say to the person, hey, I've been where you are. I know exactly what it's like to be here in the jail and to feel this or to feel that, and I was threatened by people. This is exactly how that feels, and I can help you with that. And here's some of the things that I did, and how would you like me to help you?
So this this peer support specialist is going to be a former recipient of mental health services. That's what you contemplated?
Yep. It's a former mental health provider, preferably someone that has some experience with incarceration so they know what that's like. They go through a
That's great if you find the right person.
You have to find the right person, absolutely. And they go through a series of trainings through the department the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. It's a certification. It's not like they come in and they don't get any certification. They have to go through this certification. They have to maintain that certification. And we would provide the supervision and the direct care for these individuals. They would not be doing any assessment of risk. That would fall to the mental health professional because that's a different level of care. This person would focus on the re-entry into the community because they know what's happened and they know how they were successful and how they can help other people be
Well, that
successful.
sounds good, but I want somebody who can assist the person in setting up post-release support, treatment, contacting family, natural supports, and I'm less concerned about them being able to empathize. I mean, that's nice, I understand, but I want somebody who can be a case manager. Is that what this person is?
The idea with the certified peer support is that it meets the best of both of those worlds. So yes, it can do everything that you said. I would expect them to do everything that I put in that.
You got one of these people available, and you know who you're picking, and,
Yes, I do.
all right.
I have 10 positions at our agency.
Second question, in your proposal, how would mental health medications be handled? Because many mental health professionals are not authorized, maybe not qualified
We're not
to
qualified.
decide, make a final decision on certain medications. How would you handle the evaluation and prescription of medications for inmates who are mentally ill and in need?
We could not do that. A licensed mental health professional with a social work degree or a counseling degree cannot prescribe medication.
I wouldn't want to offend the state's licensing system, believe me,
Mm-hmm.
but who do you suggest would then handle that function? Because somebody needs to get the reports and put the seal of approval and say whatever medication it is appropriate for this person.
We would refer to the jail's medical provider to do that.
Okay, so this is the $163,000 here for these two positions. They'd have to have a psychiatrist beyond that in order to handle the medication issues.
Yes. Or a nurse practitioner or some form of medical provider, yes.
Yeah, and I'm not being critical, I'm trying to explore your proposal.
I appreciate
So
that.
that'd be an addition. Okay, so the two together, the rest of it I'm not too excited, but the two together is the case manager and the mental health professionals, $163,500. Then the question is, where does this money come from? Whether it be this proposal or any other provider, and that's kind of, to some degree, the county board will have to make a decision, because taking money from another spot always creates, the advocates come out of the woodwork. And, if you take it from mental health, there'll be mental health advocates who will be upset. If you take it from some other place, other people will be upset. But that's the kind of money they're talking about. Now, I encountered, and I've shared this with some of you, just at a party, actually, a mental health person from Benzie, Manistee. They provide, their two counties and their jails together are significantly smaller than our jail, but it's a comparable situation. $100,000, they have one FTE mental health professional who is dedicated to these two jails. So that's not unlike what you're proposing. Now, the case manager idea is a nice thing, because that's one of the concerns we have. Sure, you got problems in the jail, which has become our frontline mental health treatment situation for all sorts of reasons that are beyond the scope of this discussion. But the case manager has the advantage that we don't really have a good system when people are released from jail on probation to access mental health services. There are big delays. They fall off the wagon, there's some, and never then show up and go back into bad behaviors. And that mental health, I'm going to call it a case manager. I'm a little bit suspicious of saying it has to be a former mental health recipient, but it could be, I understand. But a case manager to help, who knows the system and can help these people get organized before they're released and navigate that system, I think makes a lot of sense. Interestingly, $163,000, if you compare it with Benzie Manistee at $100,000, that's probably in the ballpark.
How does Benzie get repaid, though?
Well, I heard, and this is over a beer, so you can take it to the bank.
We will.
I heard that their counties took the $100,000 from CMH, gave it to the jail contracts with CMH, and then through some magic that our finance people will undoubtedly figure, because I did some research on it and I couldn't understand it, but I got a little bit here for it if you're interested. using the upper payment limit. They send it into the state, and it comes back magically increased from 100,000 to some bigger amount. So it doesn't really cost CMH 100,000, it costs them significantly less. And the person from CMH I was talking to seemed happy. And I don't think it was the beer. He seemed happy with what was happening, and they have a good relationship with their jail, he thinks. So I think there's, this proposal, and we need to look at the funding. This upper limit thing, I got something I copied out of it, I couldn't understand it, but there's ways to do it. But in any event, those are my...
There has
Thank you
been
for
some
the-
question about the funding, specifically related to Manistee Benzie and the relationship that they have with the contract. And Lori and Carl and I spent some time on the phone, excuse me, with Mr. Johnston, excuse me, to inquire about that. Like, how do you make this happen?
You didn't beat up on it,
Because
did you?
we did not. No, we were
Okay.
like sponges, you know? I mean, if somebody
good.
finds something that we can all use, we want to know that. But the bottom line is, there is a misconception that that's Medicaid dollars. It is not Medicaid dollars. It does get into the funding that Lori spoke about, that you have to match. We have to use the local dollars to match. If we were to suddenly say, we're no longer going to match these dollars. If Grand Traverse County, for example, said, you take that money and you do this with it and don't use it for the local match, we would lose the Medicaid dollars in our area. We would lose that money. And that's what Chip is, or Mr. Johnston is saying to you. He's saying, if I use this money, I have this arrangement, this contract arrangement where I give the jail money and they send it back to me, but it's still part of that local match that Lori spoke about that then allows them to draw down the Medicaid dollars for their counties. But it's Medicaid dollars in the county, not in the jail system specifically. That's why they have
And
to have
that's
the
why
other
it's going to, that's
contract.
a decision probably of the county board, once it's decided what this proposal or some other proposal, they're going to have to decide where the money comes from. It can come all from CMH, in which case you will have an argument why it's particularly unfair, and the audience will be filled with people who will support you, or you can take it from somewhere else. Don't take it from the dog catcher, they'll be very upset. Everybody's got an advocacy group, but it'll have to come from somewhere, and some of it could come from CMH, but that's going to be a decision that will be made politically, as it should be. Thank you.
What's been CMH's history with the jail in helping to coordinate training in the past? And since you're at 6 counties, there's more than one jail. Have you been offering help with their training at the other counties as well?
Yeah, we offer the mental health first aid training. We've been doing that since 2008. And I'm one of those trainers, so I can directly speak to that. We also hold quarterly meetings, and those quarterly meetings involved court staff, jail staff, the sheriff's department. We all come together to talk about what's going on and to use that as the prosecuting attorney's office, yeah. And we're recently in Misaki and Wexford County, we're looking to include some defense attorneys. But the idea there is to collaborate and have some cross-training in regular ongoing meetings as well. So some formalized training and then some increased relationships that can help with that. And we have a really good relationship with Todd. I know there's a lot of strain around this, and I hear what you're saying about needing more services and wanting more services, but it is not unheard of for me to pick up the phone and give Todd a call and say, hey, I have this concern, or for Todd to call me and say, I need some help now, and we're dropping stuff and we're working through those things. So we do have a good relationship there that we continue to build and try to preserve and continually enhance. That doesn't take away from the need. We're not saying that takes away from the need, so we still need to address that.
Are you running any sort of supervised medication program post-release?
We do not have
They don't do any
supervised medication programs.
Does the ACT team still do that?
Well, maybe I better ask you a little more clearly what you meant by that, because I thought you were talking about substance use and maybe the, like, Suboxone
My
type stuff.
experience with the mentally ill population who became felons was that a significant number, I mean, I don't have statistics, it's anecdotal, but a significant number would never have been in court if they hadn't gone off their medication. They're bipolar, they're schizophrenic, whatever. They get off their medication and then they do something that they wind up in felony court. So if they'd been on their medication, then they would have been fine. All right, whatever. They're now in felony court, they're on probation. I wanted to make sure as a judge that they were taking their medication, and I was never satisfied that there was the level of cooperation from community mental health to make sure they were taking their medication, or if they knew that they weren't, that they were letting the Department of Corrections know that this person was going off the rails.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see mentally ill people in court doing bad things to other people simply because they aren't taking their medication.
So I better understand your question. Yes, we do some of that, primarily with the ACT teams, as Todd has mentioned, which is we can go out and do eyes on medication. So we watch them take their medication, however many times a day that it's prescribed. That is not common. And I think that part of the requirements for the mental health code that I put up there to do some education on that, we have a lot of limitations in the mental health code that people probably aren't aware of. And I know that when you're looking at somebody who's in the jail and somebody who's been through the courts, in your eyes, they've had a lot of their rights taken away. But in the mental health code that governs the mental health services, they haven't. And so there has to be a process. We would actually, if you wanted us to do that for somebody who wasn't willing, it would have to be a court order, because we couldn't do that without their permission.
Well, that was always the tension. I mean, they're on probation. I understand under state law, you have the right to be mentally ill if you want to be mentally ill, and that's cool, until you get involved with the state because you've done something wrong to someone else. Then the court order did require that they take medication. And those were the two big problems. Lack of confidence that the medications were being taken, and lack of confidence that the failure to take medication, getting off the program that keeps you healthy, was being reported back to the court so the court could find some way to intervene.
The vast majority of orders that I have seen coming from the court that we're involved with, just observation, is they do not say mental health has to watch you take your medications or you have to have a supervised.
We're sort of a little far afield, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's as long as you got you here. Compare our relationship in the criminal justice system with substance abuse treatment. That's a bigger problem than mental illness. And we send them to treatment, we send them to testing, and if they stop going to treatment, the substance abuse professionals will call the probation officer. They don't regard the courts as the enemy. They will call the probation officer, they'll discuss, Mr. Jones failed to appear, has stopped coming to treatment, and the probation officer can reach out and contact Mr. Jones and get the thing corrected. It may involve just a talking to, it might involve a 3-day stay in the county jail, or it might involve a more major probation violation proceeding. They can use reasonable action to get cooperation with substance abuse treatment. We could be doing the same thing to help you be successful in treating the mentally ill felons. But we need to have a cooperative relationship in which you are willing to talk to our professionals, our mental health, well, they're not mine, they work for the state of Michigan, the Department of Corrections probation officers, and work with them as partners instead of as people you view as enemies.
And we do that. And as part of that larger interagency meeting that I was speaking with you about, we do invite the probation officers to those meetings as well. And when they work with us and they tell us what they need from us, we do that, because we have a court order that then says that.
I'm just saying, in substance abuse, we don't have these problems very much. We generally have very good relationships with the treaters there, with our probation people, and it should be that way with mental health. We're all trying to accomplish the same thing.
I can tell you from personal experience, who had a little brother with schizophrenia, that to get to a level where we had an ACT team interact with him to follow up with his medications, we did have to go through probate court and get him declared, even as an adult, a ward of the state, and have a guardian assigned to him before we could ever get to a level of an ACT team where they followed up on medication and would even report to the family what was going on with them. It's very difficult under the mental health code.
Part of that, again, is the mental health code, and I think we could talk about that for a long time. That's probably a separate discussion, the limitations, but I do believe that having education about what the mental health code, how it governs us, is important for the ongoing conversation.
Do you currently have a policy for inmates who are released from the jail with respect to giving them information on how to continue treatment with you once they are released, or is there any kind of a pre-release packet given to them, or a primer information on how they can continue these services once they are released from the jail, or once they're gone, are they just sort of, is it on them to come to you again?
I would defer that question actually to you, Todd, because
So right now, similar to the program they're discussing with the certified peer support specialist, we're running a post-release referral program, but because it's a volunteer-based program where we have volunteers coming to do it, it's on a very, very small scale. We're trying to pick the inmates that we see the most likelihood of recidivism and that they have the least amount of support structure in the community, and work with those individuals and get them what we can for follow-up. We're actually taking them to a clinic to get a prescription for the first round of medications and setting up peer support for them. But because it's volunteer-based and the volunteers have so limited hours to come in, we can't do a very wide scale right now.
Okay. So community mental health, though, like you commented earlier, if you have a patient who is a pre-existing patient before they go to jail, you'll enter the jail to assess them and provide services, but once they become a patient while they're in the jail, you don't have a system for when they get out. That's up to the jail to make the referrals.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give that impression. So if we were to send someone in and they met criteria for our services ongoing, we would assign them a worker, a case manager, who would work with them while they're in the jail and post-discharge.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but suicide ideation that doesn't generate a diagnosis of pervasively mentally ill, what happens to that person on discharge? They haven't become your patient.
When someone's on suicidal ideation, like a suicide watch, our recommendation to the jail is that they not discharge them until we come back out and see them. Because a lot of times we're also confined by laws that we don't understand some ways. Like we might say to Todd, this person needs to go to the hospital, and Todd's saying, well, they got to go to court tomorrow. I'd have to get some kind of bond, or we send them on a jail hold. There's all kinds of little intrinsicies to get someone into a hospital from the jail. But we make it clear when we put someone on suicide watch that we want to see them before they're discharged. So either they stay in that observation cell until we come back and assess them the next day, we'll do another full assessment, or we would say to the jail staff, don't let them leave until we come back and see them. And to the best of my knowledge, and Todd, you would know better, I don't believe that someone gets discharged from an observation cell once we put them there without us seeing them.
Correct, but I think your question is, once they've been cleared, if they come in, they're initially on watch, CMH then clears them, they go in population and are released. No, there isn't anything for that.
I don't think you've ever
Those
released
individuals right
anyone
now.
from an observation
No.
cell. That just doesn't happen.
No.
Right?
Well, I think we all have to also recognize the fact that, it's always easy for us to talk about, well, we need more training, we need more programming, we need whatever, but we're still limited significantly by staffing levels and by the facility itself. It's real easy to say to Todd, I want all of your people to take this 8-hour training program, but we're running a third of our staff on overtime every day right now, so how are we going to book another 8 hours for each one of them? And that's part of the problem.
Johnny, the only other question I have is with these two positions, if they were put into place, because you're familiar with the caseload in the jail, do you think that 20 hours of contracted psychiatrist service we have now would be sufficient for the oversight for these two positions? It's 20 hours a month right now.
I think that if you had 20 hours a week, you're going to be pressed. And if
Well, right
you
now
had
it's 20 a
40
month.
hours a week, you would easily get into that. I've had this conversation with you mildly before, in that I think how we go about the referrals is imperative. So I really wasn't prepared to talk about this, but since you asked the question, I'm going to talk about this. So recently, Stacy and I went into the jail and we saw overflow. So I'm familiar with this. I just was in your jail providing services to people in the jail. We must have had about 18 people that we needed to see that day, and that was part of the reason why Stacy and I went into the jail, because we wanted to make sure those people were seen. And of those people, the ones that I saw, you were there, 2 minutes. I don't want to see you. Can you prescribe me medications? No, I don't have the authority to do that. I don't want to see you. So then they weren't seen. They were immediately taken back to their cell, and that was probably of those, the vast majority of the ones I saw were that way. I know Stacy did see a couple of people a little longer that day, but there's this cyclical thing that definitely we have to get at. And this is more your operational piece, regardless of what happens here today. And that is, when you make a referral, we said, you want psychiatric medications, I wrote on that sheet from the jail, person refused to see me, seeking medications, and there's a checkbox on there, should this person see the medical provider? I checked yes. They said they wanted medications. So now that person has to go see the medical provider. The medical provider wants to know if we want them to prescribe psychiatric medications. I can't make that call. So, and neither can Joe, and so it goes in a circle. And that's kind of where we're at. So when you're asking about time, if we could get better at working together to say, how is this process going to flow and what is appropriate? Because it doesn't make sense to send them to me when I can't make that call, but I can certainly have conversations or maybe even link them to a psychiatrist for consultation. But you have Dr. Conlon who can do that as well. To provide that consultation.
Doesn't Dr. Conlon and every psychiatrist rely upon reports and contacts by mental health professionals such as yourself? When you talk to the person, what do you think? And your evaluation of their mental state, and the psychiatrist, I assume, also meets with the person, but psychiatrists don't have time to spend a lot of time with each person. I mean, they do rely on your advice. You can't just say, if it's medication, I'm not going to be involved. Because mental health treatment almost always involves medication as at least part of the problem.
For some people, it's part of the solution in terms of medication, and I can certainly share my observations, and I can share what the diagnosis that I've come up with in terms of the DSM-5.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
That I can do, but to say this person needs medication or they need
Okay, but the
Xanax
answer
or
shouldn't
something,
be,
we wouldn't
I'm not
do
going
that.
to talk to you because you want medication and I can't give you medication. The answer should be,
think
well,
part of
I can talk to someone who can give you medication. Now, what's going on in your life? I mean, what did you do to get here?
There was no getting to that point that they refused to see us.
I think it's not so much a thing as the CMH people are not willing to
Right.
to have the conversation with the inmate. It's the inmates don't want to have the conversation with anyone unless they're going to give them the drugs. Correct.
Yes. That's exactly what's
And I think that's a big piece. It's
that was
easy
not
for
a
us to talk
problem.
about the cooperation between CMH and the CCS people and Dr. Conlon. I actually think that relationship is fairly okay. The problem is we have no recourse when the inmate says, no, I'm not going to talk to you unless you're going to give me the drugs. And I think that happens more often than not.
Let me ask a crass question. When I looked at this peer support specialist, I was initially thinking, okay, you've got a master's degree licensed social worker or a psychologist making $98,000 in today's world. Yeah, that's not stunning to me. I assumed the peer support specialist was at least a BA in sociology or psychology with some specialized training. But $65,000 for, I guess the crassest way to put it, a former felon who was once mentally ill with 40 hours of training? I don't know of a single person in my old office who makes $65,000 a year. I don't know of a corrections officer who makes $65,000 a year. Commissioner Wheelock and Commissioner Mary work very hard at holding down salaries. I'm just curious where that number came from.
Just to clarify, those figures, those are salary and benefits. So that's not just a salary number that they
Doesn't
receive.
change my response.
And I think one of the things that the state of Michigan and the public mental health system has grasped and found the benefit of is the work of the certified peer support specialist. And I do think that not only do they have lived experience, but they also have the training, they also have the commitment, and we have seen time after time after time the efficacy of the services that they provide. And as Joni mentioned earlier, we have seen that you have someone and then they have contact and intervention with a peer support specialist. We have the data that shows that they go into the hospital less. I mean, it is an effective intervention at a level that is different than a licensed mental health social worker or licensed psychologist, but it is effective, Judge, and that's proven to be the case. That's why Northern Lakes has embraced it. We're one of the CMHs in the state that has a very robust program for certified peer support specialists.
Alcoholics Anonymous is incredibly effective. Narcotics Anonymous is incredibly effective.
Agreed.
But the people sitting around the chairs with each other aren't making $65,000.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you about the salary level. I mean, we can have that conversation, or you can do studies and so
I'm just
forth,
looking at a
but-
couple of guys who worked really hard at holding down the salaries in my office for the 26 years that I was there. And I would just suggest to them that they think this is a fair number, they're going to be reminded of it later.
I did cost that out with family level benefits. That is the absolute highest level.
But this person doesn't even necessarily have anything beyond a high school education.
Well, I guess,
That's what I just said. They don't necessarily have anything beyond a high school education. They could be a high school education, former felon, formerly mentally ill, and they're very good at counseling. And they're going to make $65,000 a year. And a person in my old office with a college degree who understands court rules, evidence, and computers better than most attorneys in this area is not making that kind of money.
well, I don't doubt that you have very valuable and dedicated staff, and the issue of equity of pay and benefits is a broader issue. So you asked us for a presentation with information, we
I
presented
wasn't
that
here
to
last
you.
time.
Well, and I do appreciate the information that we've been given this evening. Does anyone have any other questions, or do you have anything you folks want to add? And then I'd like to hear from the others. I'd like to not be here till midnight.
I have just one other comment. We appreciate being part of this conversation and part of this ad hoc committee. And we will continue to participate now and into the future. And we have a deep commitment to mental health and corrections. Just to tell you, I just recently volunteered to continue the Mental Health and Corrections Work Group of the Community Mental Health Association of Michigan. And I have a report that was just issued that I have copies for you. And we're going to try to gather as much information from around the state, what other counties are doing and so forth, so that we can benefit the services that go on at the jails, all 6 of our jails, and to, as a community, address a community problem, because it's not just a jail issue, it's just not a CMH issue, it's a community issue. So we want to try to gather as many people together around the table to solve this, to make it better. And I'll put in the plug for the sequential intercept model, which is referenced in this paper, because it's a national standard that looks at the whole continuum before somebody has any engagement with law enforcement to when they're on probation. And it looks at ways that mental health can intervene effectively along those intercepts. So thank you. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, Carl.
Oh, yes, and on the 31st of May, from 1 to 4, we will have our 3rd public discussion that will include mental health and corrections and homelessness. And that'll be at our Northern Lakes office on Hall Street. I will be sending out notices and agenda of that. And we invite everyone who would like to participate in that community dialogue about those 2 very important topics.
Thank you.
Well, I think we have to recognize CMH has to be at this table. You know, historically, Grand Traverse County pays $682,000 a year to CMH. That's a big piece of money, you know.
Historically,
You know,
Grand Traverse County had oversight of CMH.
We had that discussion last month when you weren't here, Phil, and in fact, I even made note to which section of the enabling agreement that created CMH specifically states that community mental health shall provide mental health services within the jail at no cost to the county. But that's not where we're at today. We're at a different place. We need to try to figure out how to do something better. Okay, Todd, do you want to talk about CCS
Yep.
and Dr. Conlon's
We'll
proposals?
discuss CCS first. They did pass out their proposal, or price quote for their proposal. Essentially, they've offered us 2 options in addition to what we have now through CCS for mental health. The current contract for CCS mental health is 20 hours per month. They've provided 2 cost options. Option 1 excuse me, is the addition of a psychiatric nurse practitioner that would operate on-site 40 hours a week. For that, they quoted $238,257 annually. Option number 2 was a mental health professional, similar to that recommended in the CMH proposal. That person would not be able to prescribe medications, but could provide counseling and coping with an addition of 3 hours per month, taking it to a total of 23 hours of psychiatry time a month for $125,615. The thing that really is not addressed in here that I was hoping to hear them speak about was what and how those services would be provided, specifically how they were going to target their services. They are going to be able to make the next ad hoc meeting or before that if necessary to come back and actually discuss the details of their proposal. The other proposal we have is from Wellspring Psychiatry. Dr. Marilyn Conlon is the current psychiatrist that is contracted through CCS. She has submitted a proposal to have Wellspring Psychiatry take over the mental health treatment of the jail in lieu of being a part of the CCS contract. In her proposal, she has included 40 hours of on-site psychiatric care and broke that down to 4 hours of supervision a week by Dr. Conlon, 10 hours a week of a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and then 26 hours a week of a certified mental health specialist, master's level social worker. That proposal came at the cost of $420,000. $420,000.
Well, without having the other two presenters here to talk about it, it's very difficult to try to get a handle on exactly what we're going to do. You know, it's easy to look at the numbers and say, wow. You know, I find the CCS proposal very similar to what we heard from mental health a minute ago as far as the professional mental health care provider, 40 hours a week, you know, and it's, you know, they're proposing it at $115,000 compared to $98,000. We're basically in the similar in contract pricing. I guess the question has to do with next steps. Do we want to ask Dr. Conlon and CCS to come in at our next meeting and outline their proposals a little bit better? You know, obviously, we're not in a position to make a decision here tonight. What we're going to do down the road at some point is make a recommendation to the County Board of Commissioners about where we feel that we're going to best address the mental health needs in our jail. I think we still have a lot of questions. At least in my mind, I still have a lot of questions.
What I don't think we have here is the ability to independently review these three options and determine which is the best mix at the most reasonable price. I mean, we're not going to solve the problem just by throwing money at it. We have to have the right mix of people in the jail providing services. I have my youngest daughter is interested in becoming a nurse practitioner, and what she was telling me was she was not going to be making $238,000 a year. My doctor daughter would like to be making $238,000 a year.
Yeah, I think the
So
number.
one option might be that we hire our own nurse practitioner and not pay the profit to the company.
Well, and as we all know, prior to the CCS contract, we in fact had Dr. Conlon under contract by Grand Traverse County to provide mental health services in our jail. Then she took a hiatus for a year and a half, and we in turn were stuck trying to find medical services in our jail. We were continuously having trouble trying to keep nursing staff, medical staff available in the jail, not to mention the mental health issues. And we went out for an RFP, and did we get 3 bids, Todd? I was trying to remember.
Yep.
I think we got 3 proposals to provide mental and psychiatric services within the jail. CCS was the selected provider. You know, how well that contract is working, when that, I don't remember when that contract's up for renewal. It's fairly soon, if I
Yeah,
remember right.
through 2019.
So, you know, I think somewhere along the way, someone talked earlier about trying to audit what we're getting for what we're paying for. I think that's probably certainly appropriate. And somewhere within the next short time, we will be evaluating all of that, you know, to make sure that what we are getting is what we're paying for, and we're getting the best bang for our buck we can possibly get.
Well, some of these prices, quite frankly, you know, shock me. I mean, 3 hours per month for a psychiatrist, you do the math on that, that's an extraordinary amount per hour. We clearly need someone who can prescribe medication, and sometimes that'll be a psychiatrist, sometimes that could be a nurse practitioner. You also can use people who don't have that level of qualification, I forget what they're called, that can do more of the daily work. So it's about determining the proper mix and then getting some reasonable competition. I mean, $420,000 a year for basically 40 hours of service, that just seems like a lot. You know, $420,000 a year if you're getting 80 or 120 hours a week of service, okay. Especially when so little of it is the PhD.
One of the things we have to remember and consider when we're looking or to start discussing hiring our own care provider is the associated cost of that care provider outside of the salary and benefits, and the biggest one being the medical malpractice
Well, you
insurance.
gotta pay for that, that's it.
And
Well, you might price that, it might not be as expensive as you think.
well, we looked at that prior, and we haven't looked at it in about 5 or 6 years, but 5 or 6 years ago, it was a pretty hefty figure.
That's from Dr. Collins.
Yeah, and when we looked at continuing a contract with her to be an independent contractor, she was getting into the realm of wanting to negotiate part of that being covered before she decided to leave and going to CCS. Now, I'm not by any means recommending anything at this point, but just those are things we have to keep in mind, especially if we're talking about getting our own provider. Those are some big costs that aren't going to be reflected in a salary cost. I tell you, from the 3 I'm seeing and knowing the needs that we're seeing right now in the jail, one thing that we haven't discussed before it was proposed tonight is a support specialist for release referrals, and that is a huge component that we've talked about for a long time. We've tried to initiate some programming in the jail on a volunteer basis to make happen, but that's a big shortcoming for us, and here we do have a proposal.
Well, and it's not just upon release, but it also can be utilized while the people are still incarcerated.
Exactly.
You know, I mentioned earlier, I think at least a significant portion of this population just simply needs somebody that can talk to them and understand what they're going through, and that's what that peer person can do for us. And maybe that's, I think all of this is an important discussion, but I think we're not prepared to make a decision yet by any sense of the word. But I think we've gotten some good information tonight. I appreciate Carl and his staff and their presentation tonight, because at least it gives us, ideas about what we can do differently. I think it's real easy to get into the rut of this is the way we've always done it, but I think we've also can get to a point that we've recognized that the way we've been doing it isn't necessarily working to the best of our benefit or to our inmates' benefit. We've talked about it before. It's the condition within the jail for our inmates also reflects on our staff, and I think we sometimes forget the number of hours that our staff put in those same environment. We talked about earlier how the inmate don't want to interact with the CMH staff. some of the inmates won't interact with our staff either, and that's not necessarily to any of our benefit.
If I could summarize where I think we are, I think the presentation, the offer to provide this, I guess I would call it, EMT training for the jail staff is wonderful, and that should be taken advantage of. If somebody needs to know how to do CPR until you get to the emergency room. And this kind of training for emergent mental health crises is wonderful, and that should be taken advantage of. We have 3 proposals here. What I don't see, and I think we need help to do this, is have someone give us advice who runs a state-of-the-art mental health program in a jail somewhere. What is the mix? What is the mix of nurse practitioner, support specialist, and psychiatrist within the jail? How do you do that? How many FTEs per size of the jail, per inmate? And get some feel for what that should be. And it may turn out that this is just like buying a slide. It costs one price at Walmart if you're going to put it in your backyard. There's a different price if you're going to put it in an elementary school. And if that's the case, so be it, and we're going to have to pay more. But I think right now we don't even know what the proper mix is.
Well, and I think, that's, from coming out of what we have here this evening, we can certainly, Todd and I can go and we can talk to other counties throughout the region. Judge Power talked about the Wexford Manistee situation, and we can contact them and talk about how they're doing things differently. There's a lot of other county jails in the state of Michigan and throughout the Midwest that have the same problem. Mental health as a whole across the country is just a growing issue. And I think we just simply need to do a little bit more research and see what other people are doing. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel, but we've heard some good possibilities here this evening and some good recommendations. Tom?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that Community Mental Health was here. It's a good presentation, included a lot of information, but CCS would have been here also had they not canceled, so I think we need to reschedule them for the next ad hoc and ask Dr. Conlon or somebody from Wellspring to present as well in person so that we can have a conversation instead of just have a document to read in front of us.
Yeah, because all we really have is a price list. I'd really like to hear what they're going to provide for those dollar amounts. All right, meeting schedule. When we set this meeting up the first time, we did it the third Tuesday of the month. I think it was just an arbitrary number that actually fit in my schedule last month. So that's kind of where we started, and then we moved one to the third Tuesday of this month. I have been asked, because there's another ad hoc committee that the county board has running that's also meeting at 5:30 in the training room. And so there's a conflict. Some of the staff and some of the other commissioners would like to participate a little bit more, and there's a conflict in scheduling. So they're asking whether or not we would consider, if we were to look at other dates. I tentatively had scheduled this commission chambers for the second Tuesday of every month from now through the end of the year for 6 months. I figured 6 months would certainly get us through what we have to do. I'm hoping we're going to be done before that, but in order to lock down a time and a schedule, I think this is a better venue for us. It gives us more opportunity to see video presentations and facilitate more of a larger group of people if they want to. I don't know how it fits everyone else's schedule, so if
I was going to suggest first Tuesday.
Is there anyone has a preference one way or the other?
So you're looking at the second Tuesday.
We are currently at the second Tuesday,
Okay.
right? Second Tuesday,
No,
third?
we're currently
No,
at
we're
the third.
We're at the third Tuesday. We're at the third Tuesday currently. Tuesday evenings, this facility, or this room is pretty much vacant and available. Not every meeting, no? Chris is telling me no.
What if first Tuesdays and second Tuesdays
So
look like?
So it was a lucky thing when I picked out the third Tuesday and we found the dates and it fit every time? I'm better than I thought,
Actually, city planning that's normally in here. They just canceled their meeting tonight. Tuesdays really is not a good time for this room to be available. Usually they're 7 o'clock.
Is there something on first Tuesday and second Tuesday also?
Most of the time.
The facility as a whole is pretty booked.
I can do a doodle poll with a couple of options if you'd like. And we can go with that.
You know, we can look at other dates if, you know, if
Well, we
nobody's.
do have more facilities. I mean, you got the courthouse right next door, and there are rooms there that we can.
Right, there are other county facilities that we can use. There's also the training, we have the training room in the back. Last month, we met in the 300 room upstairs, and it simply was not large enough to handle, you know, anyone else to come in. So that's why we tried to move it down here for this month anyway. So we're going to go ahead and look at other options and possibly other locations and dates, and before you get your agenda for your next month's meeting, that will be reset, and it may change slightly if that'll work for anybody else.
So we're not going to pick a date today then?
We're not, I don't know that we need to pick a date right now unless someone has a specific date. Is there a specific day of the month that doesn't work for others?
Friday.
Phil's retired, he's
Friday,
got no.
Saturday.
Say it, you're all
Sundays.
thinking it.
Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
I'm going to meet Friday evening. Nobody will show up.
All right, so we're gonna work on the meeting schedule. Now, there's one other piece, there's two pieces of this ad hoc dealing with the jail. The first is this ad hoc committee that we're sitting on. Primarily, our immediate function was to try to figure out what we can do about improving our mental health services. And the second is to possibly look at the actual creation of a RFP to select someone to help us build a new jail. Okay? The other piece, and Tom and Phil will remember very thoroughly the discussion of the creating of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. That was the recommendation a while back, and it was reiterated in the 2014 presentation that we needed to create this Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee. The membership of that committee is outlined in the I guess the way that it's formed, and it calls for one circuit court judge, one district court judge, county prosecutor, a local criminal defense attorney, court appointed, the county administrator, the sheriff, the county jail administrator, one Traverse City commissioner, one Grand Traverse County commissioner, and one citizen of Grand Traverse County, and one community mental health representative. Those are outlined in the description of what a Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee does. My thought in having, you know, Tom and Mike here were the fact that I'm hoping that they are going to be the circuit court and the district court judges that are appointed to this Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. My suggestion in some of the discussions that I've had is that I think once this new this coordinating council is appointed, that they need to, or we need to jointly meet with them a little bit, because when we talk about the creation of a new jail or the need for a new jail, there's no sense in us both going through the research. You know, the research, most of the research has already been done. We can certainly, you know, evaluate the research is done, evaluate the report. You know, Todd and I looked at a draft document for a jail consultant. No, Todd's happier with the proposal than I am, but I got a lot more scribble marks in mine than he had in his. But the first thing that we have to do is that we need to do a new needs assessment and figure out is the 300 beds the right number, or is it 280, or is it 320? You know, in 2004, a Blue Ribbon Jail Committee spent 15 months. Judge Power was on that, I was on that, along with a number of other people. And it was deemed that, you know, we gained the 40 beds when the Sheriff's Department and the City Police moved out of the former jail area, and then we moved to the Law Enforcement Center on Woodmere. Those 40 beds were gained immediately. but it was projected that we needed 250 to 300 beds by 2020. It's 2018. If we made the decision tonight to build a new jail, by the time we got it designed, contracted, and fabricated, we wouldn't be moving a prisoner in there by 2020. It's 3 to 5 years to build a jail.
Well, a couple of things. Until the recent boarding out, which when you add to the number of people who are currently housed in the jail, still doesn't exceed its rated capacity. I understand there's reasons why, for security reasons, that occurs. With a population increase of, 40-some%, and a decrease in the number of beds from 190-something to what it is now, what I don't know has been getting factored in the needs assessment is that the district court especially, and the circuit court through the community corrections program, have radically changed the way sentencing works and how long people are in jail and when they're eligible for release. A gentleman spoke earlier about getting released at quarter time. We're releasing many people at halftime. Halftime less good time. So that effectively a sentence to a year in the county jail, if you mind your P's and Q's, is basically 5 months. I don't think, whether that was figured into that last needs assessment or not, I don't know. And I would hope that before we spend money on a brand-new 300-bed jail, we not only look at what do we really need in the way of beds in view of population projections and what's happened with the diminished use of the jail in the face of rising population. I mean, you have to look at the demographics of the area. And the other thing is, I know that the only constitutional obligation of the sheriff is to run the jail. Not road patrol, not detective work, not investigation. So sheriffs tend not to be so good at cooperating with each other with regard to their jails. Wexford County's built a new one. Benzie led the charge with their jail quite a while ago now. Leelanau County has this beautiful 75-bed jail that generally has less than 20 people in it. And I distinctly recall being given a tour of that jail by Dave Gill just before it opened, where he stood me at this spot and said, "Judge, and that's where the next pod goes." I expressed horror at the thought that Leelanau County, that has 15 people in jail, might ever need more than 75 beds. But I remembered it because is there even on anyone's radar the notion that we might consider some sort of joint agreement with a county like Leelanau? Maybe we own the pod. I mean, I know it's all about control, but it ought to be about economics too. This is taxpayer money. And before we go run out and build a 300-bed, $40 million jail, where we still have issues with roads in this area and other infrastructure questions, that we look at some other intermediate, by intermediate I'm talking like 30 or 40 years, lower cost solution. I'd just like to think that some form of regional cooperation might still be one element on this calculus before we end up with the $40 million building on Lafreniere. Just saying.
Well, I'm sure that we're not prepared to make a decision to build a jail right now. The other thing that I have asked, and I don't know exactly if we've established a date for it, before we talk about hiring a jail consultant to help us with any of that, or even to review our new needs assessment, I want the county board to weigh in on how it's going to be paid for and whether there is truly a commitment to build a jail. I don't want to hire a consultant to come and say, yes, you need a jail, you need this, you need that, and unless the county board is willing to weigh in and commit that, yes, we need the jail and we are willing to commit the funds. No. We've heard from the finance director and the interim administration right now that they believe that the money has been identified, that we can make it happen because of some bonds on the district court building and the health department buildings that are going to be paid off before this building would be constructed.
And that gets into a public policy dispute as to what other things could we do with that money. It's like, here's my current favorite example, we have no money to fix 8th Street, but we've got $3.2 million of magic brownfield money, as though that's not tax dollars largely generated within the city of Traverse City, being used to pave a trail, most of which is in Garfield Township. I mean, people need to talk about public policy alternatives and not just whether or not they have money.
All right, is there anything else? Might throw my papers away. Is there anything else that anyone wants to discuss tonight? Is there any public comment at this point? Please.
My name is Richard Powell. I'm the multimedia developer for the Grand Traverse County Republican Party. In addition to doing political videos, over the last 3 we've been involved in community reach-out videos. I've done videos for Bonnie Shealy, Bob Cooney, Tom Bentley, Munson, and we were thinking that this jail issue might be an excellent community reach-out project for us. If the chairman thinks that such a project would be worthwhile, I would submit a production schedule next month and see if your committee is interested in such a thing. We have pretty good distribution among our membership, social media, and putting videos into townships. So I think that we can create a video that would actually have a lot of exposure to the general community. My own feeling is I don't believe a lot of people know about the jail, even where it's located and things like that. I would anticipate just a general outline, starting with Dick Weiler and the original jail. I'm old enough to remember the old jail. And I think if we had a video that could show why the jail was made, how it was laid out, how the demographics at the time served the community, have people in the video who can talk about issues relating to public safety, to security, a lot of other things that I think the community would be very interested in such a video, and we would have a very high viewership of that video. Is that something you'd be interested in, Mr. Chairman?
I'm inclined to think we may be. I'm not sure we're ready to do that at this point. I think at some point we have a discussion about, particularly at such a point as we come to some sort of a decision about we need a new jail. We need to talk about the history of what we have and the facility that we have. It's, there are a couple things that are really good about the jail, but there are some things that are, a little deficient, just simply because of the fact that the core of that jail was built in 1964.
And the purpose of the video wouldn't be to steer anybody in any one direction, just to make them aware of what the situation is.
I guess I'd be interested in seeing a proposal. If you want to submit us a proposal, obviously this committee is not going to make that decision. I would be happy to take the proposal to the Board of Commissioners.
Very good, thank you.
Tom Bensley, Grand Traverse County Sheriff. Just a couple of comments related to yours. Judge Rogers, the capacity of the jail used to be 194 beds. 26 of those were in a work release facility. 26, okay? When we decided to close that, we were using only 6 beds, and that has continued. And it cost us 4 corrections officers to guard 6 inmates. That was the prudent thing to do because it put 4 more staff into the main jail. So the reason that number declined is, and those were less than minimum beds. So when you say the jail, the beds have gone down, yes, but it's like those were beds we could not and did not use. So just wanted to clear up any misconceptions. So the capacity now is 168. On any given day, because of the way the cells are designed, we may be able to use 162 of those beds, with separation due to innumerable different issues. If everything went accordingly with separations and classifications, we may be able to use 162 beds. To operate the facility efficiently, we should only have 85% of our rated jail bed capacity, which means to operate that at a very efficient level, to be able to classify inmates, to move them around, to keep them separate for any innumerable reasons, our max population should be 143 inmates. So when you're talking about everything coming down, we have a facility that should only house 143 inmates that, in that facility. And it's just not real simple of boarding out inmates because some facilities will not take them. They're problems. We have many problem inmates in the jail, and when we board them out, those other facilities, they only want the best of the best of the best. So it's not just simple math by saying, just send them to Leelanau County for $30 a day. That works for some of them. But when we have over half the population now are felons, and many with issues and problems that other facilities don't want, it's not so easy just to say, here, take them. So just wanted to clear up any misconceptions on what our populations are, or our capacities are. To operate that efficiently, fully staffed, is 143. And we've been dealing with staffing issues way less than we should be for years because of trying to get and hire corrections officers. So the number is 143 is where we should be, and we should be fully staffed. Thank you.
Well, we need to remember that the 143 efficiency level, and I believe our 2017 average daily population was 158. So we're still over the efficient use of our jail. Staffing issues are a continuous problem. I spoke to that a little bit earlier, the amount of overtime that's having to be scheduled on a daily basis because we are simply unable to find staff. Unlike every other industry in our community that I know of.
Well, the point was not that jail beds have gone down because they were inefficient or being wasted. The point was, due to changes in sentencing practices, despite a significant increase in population, the actual need for jail beds went down. We're housing 143 or whatever, where we used to have overcrowdings at 191. We haven't had a jail overcrowding in, I don't know, this century, I don't think. We used to have them all the time in the 90s. They were so often in Antrim County, you couldn't have an effective community corrections program. So the point is, it's not just is population going up. Are we hiring more police? Are we hiring more prosecutors? All those things play into how many people are going to come through the system, and then what are the sentencing practices. If you have, for example, a good post-release diversion program for the mentally ill, where you know they're going to get their medication, where you know that someone's going to make sure they get their counseling, then you're more willing to see someone released earlier than not. That's all that has to go into this. And you don't have to just board out. You could actually own a facility. And I'm guessing that the marginal cost of putting a pod onto a facility that already has centralized security and centralized food and centralized gymnasium is going to cost less marginal dollars per bed than building a $40 million thing on Lafreniere. And if that's ultimately what we have to do, it's what we have to do. All I'm asking is that we put on the table other options. And it doesn't have to be letting Leelanau County cherry pick felons. If you own the pod, you manage it your own way.
Yes, sir.
Eric Van Dusen. I'm just wondering whether or not anyone on this board is considering asking Correct Care Solutions, Community Mental Health, and Dr. Conlon how they propose to prevent situations in which Community Mental Health can come in for one of their contacts that they say they have in the jail, which are thousands a year. These contacts, how do they propose to prevent a situation where one of those contacts may consist of a suicide assessment of someone that's on suicide watch, consisting of a grand total of 9 minutes, and then the community mental health worker instructing jail staff to take that person off suicide watch and isolate them in a written command to isolate them. And then jail staff follows that instructions, puts them in a segregation cell.
Mr. Van Duzen,
How does
as in earlier conversation, we are not going to talk about a specific case.
I'm
And
talking generally in a
I
hypothetical.
will not continue this line of conversation. There's potential litigation in regard to the discussion that you're
not
trying to
asking
get
to
us
have a
to.
conversation
And I'm
with
not
you.
going to have a dialogue for it, and we're not going to take input on it. Thank you.
Are you refusing to allow me to continue my
Yes, sir.
public comment?
Yes, sir.
Do you understand that violates the Open Meetings Act?
I have told you that we are going to restrict the public comment in regard to the specific case, and you are talking about a specific case when you're talking about the mental health assessment that took 9 minutes, and we are not going to continue that discussion. Thank you.
So I guess I'll move on. Is anyone going to try to get community mental health, correct care solutions, and the jail staff in this process to all get on board with following the minimum standards set by the National Commission on Correctional Health Care for housing inmates in segregation cells and suicide prevention policies? Is there any coordinated effort with jail staff, CCS, CMH, and Dr. Conlon to accomplish that? I think should be a goal in all of this. Thank you.
Anyone else? We will stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.